Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Wim Lou. You're listening to the Raptors Reaction Podcast. I appreciate you guys for being patient because, unlike literally 99% of the time, I go live right at the final buzzer. But tonight, given that it was special circumstances and that Bobby Webster, the general manager of the Toronto Raptors, was scheduled to speak post-game, decided to actually make the trade-off for once, delay the React Pod, go live at a later date, and just be there for, obviously, a chance to talk to the general manager of the Raptors, especially after a pretty important time, this being the trade deadline, and get his thoughts on where the Raptors stood, why the Raptors made the moves that they made, why they didn't make some of the moves that they made. So I got lots of reporting to sort of pass along. So I appreciate you guys even just waiting the extra hour. I understand that, this is a habit for a lot of people and I don't want to break it. But I think in this case, I hope to make some of the reporting worth it. So we'll breeze through the game first, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll get to the trade deadline takeaways from Raptors general manager Bobby Webster. By the way, if you want to watch the press conference, that has been streamed live by the Raptors. I did notice the stream cuts off very abruptly at the end, but that was the final question to Bobby. So there really wasn't anything else. I don't think that it was missed or omitted. So in any case, you can go watch the takeaways there. But as of this moment, the Raptors did win the game. They won 123-107 against the Chicago Bulls. Truthfully, it was a pretty obvious result from the start. Chicago had made a lot of trades at the deadline, and the roster looked pretty different in for the team that did not play the team previously. Gershon Yabusele, who came over from the Knicks, Jaden Ivey, who came over from Detroit, and some of the prominent players you would associate with the Bulls. Longtime guys like Ayo Dosunmu, who got moved to Minnesota, or Nikola Vucevic, who got moved to Boston, Kobe White, who got moved to Charlotte. You didn't see a lot of those guys. So I think the only challenge really for the Raptors coming into this game was just, how do we prepare for an opponent that, quite frankly, is a bit like a pickup team? You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, it didn't really feel like a full team that you can really scout for. But also at the same time, the benefits of that was that you got to play a lot of players in the rotation that typically don't play. And I'm gonna try to be nice about this, but I also think that it's pretty fair to say that the Bulls had two of the smallest point guards in the league today. Look, I'm a fan of watching Asian players. I understand how difficult it is for Asians to make it to the NBA. It's pretty rare, but watching Yuki out there, the passes are nice, it's fun, but it's really easy to score on a guy who's 5'8". The Raptors literally just posted him up, threw the pass over the top, and scored layups at will against that guy. And then Mac McClung, all due respect to the dunks that he's been able to pull off at the dunk contest, which are legitimately impressive, but especially considering he's a G Leaguer getting called up for a game fresh with a team that doesn't have a lot of organization. I mean, the Raptors just made it so easy to score against him as well. He's undersized. He was missing shots left, right, and center. It was... I'm not going to couch my words on this. There were two players on the Bulls tonight that aren't NBA players. And so that made it a lot easier. Granted, the Bulls still hit a bunch of threes, and they were pretty aggressive. Anthony Simons, who they also picked up, they got by way of Boston. He was able to knock down threes like he's been doing pretty much his entire career, but especially this season. And so, at certain points, they kept it close. At one point, they even tied the game up. The Raptors pretty much led for the entire game, but in the third quarter, the Raptors had a double-digit lead. Chicago was able to hit a bunch of threes. The Raptors were turning the ball over again, kind of under no pressure whatsoever. And it looked to be a very small scale, but also very familiar scenario of the Raptors not taking the game as seriously as they need to, letting their foot off the gas pedal, and watching their lead, unfortunately, evaporate in the second half, which has been a very common theme that we have seen over and over again with this season, and especially of late. But again, given that it was the Bulls and that there was no Anthony Edwards out there, the Raptors were able to shut the door pretty quickly. The Raptors called timeout after the game was tied, I believe, at 76 in the third quarter, and the Raptors proceeded to score the next 10 points. Brandon Ingram, dominant from really start to finish. Finished the game with 33 points. Really could have gone for a 40 ball if he wanted to. Chicago largely played him in single coverage, especially in the first half. They realized how much of a mistake that was when he had, like, I think 22 by halftime. So they changed it up and they played him more doubles off in the second half, which is the way you should be playing the Raptors, quite frankly. Like, any team that comes to play the Raps and they don't double team Brandon Ingram, I got to question what their motives are or how well prepared they are, because it's a pretty straightforward game plan. You should be double teaming Brandon Ingram when you play the Raptors. I'm not giving away state secrets when I say that. And yeah, Ingram scored at will. Even in the second half, I thought Ingram was able to get to his spots. When the 3 balls dropping for him, I mean, I think the formula for Ingram 30 ball is like, the mid-range is automatic for him. He's been going to the rim a little bit more of late, which is great, because once he gets to the rim, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's like 6'9", with like the longest arms in the world, and he's got a decent bit of athleticism. He's just at the rim. Like, he's dunking the ball or he's like laying it up. He's been taking it stronger to the rim of late, which I really enjoyed. The secret to a Brandon Ingram 30 ball is if he can make 4 threes or more, it's a 30 ball, and it was a pleasure watching him get buckets. Like, it was very easy for him. Again, part of that was because of how disorganized Chicago's defense was. This is literally akin to like a bit of a pickup game, given the scenario of like them picking up some players at deadline and how many new guys were in their rotation. But nevertheless, like, Raptors took advantage of that and they played well. I thought they also got a really strong game from a lot of their supporting players. RJ Barrett didn't play today. This was planned a couple days in advance, that this being a back-to-back, that they didn't want to stretch it for RJ. There's no need to sort of push him. There's no more back-to-backs before the All-Star break, which is at the, next weekend. So this is probably the last time we got to really manage RJ's injury a little bit here. So they didn't play him tonight. Although, of course, whenever you rest a guy on the day of the trade deadline, it makes it feel like he's about to get traded. But, obviously that wasn't actually happening in this case. They had actually planned this specific target date well in advance. In any case, RJ didn't play, so they needed somebody to step up off the bench to fill that role. And I thought Jacoby Walter did a fantastic job in that spot. I thought he did a great job of just playing off of the attention of other guys. I mean, when you have a night where Brandon's scoring like that, CMB was a threat and he had mismatches to exploit. When you had Scotty, who was in a very willing mood to play make. In fact, I thought Scotty was almost, like, the game was a little beneath Scotty. Scotty knew, like, other guys were going, like, he doesn't need to sort of like press himself onto the game. And literally every time Scotty drove the ball, he scored. So like it felt like he was very much in control, but he didn't need to sort of take over. Which is one of the nice things of playing with Scotty, is that like he's not going to be selfish and going for his numbers. And then IQ is also playing well as well. So like Jacoby just needed to play off of the attention of other guys, which meant making a little cut here or there, screening, slipping back door, knocking down an open 3 if he gets it, getting on the transition, getting a little putback here or there, like just basically playing off of everyone else. And I thought he did a great job of that. On the defensive end, I thought he did a good job of climbing through screens. The big thing with Chicago is they love to spread it out, play 5 out. Pretty much they have like 4 guards and like 1 forward on the floor. Like if you thought the Raptors were playing small ball, Chicago's taking it to the next level. Not only are they small on the perimeter with like literally they got a 5'7" point guard at Yuki. And they also have Mac McClung, who can't be taller than 5'10". Like not only do they have small guards there, but they also are playing so many guards on the floor at once. Now, the difficult thing potentially is that they can really shoot the 3, play fast. But as we've seen all season, when the Raptors play teams that are small ball, they win and they crush them. You know, like that's part. A lot of the Raptors' best wins this season are against teams that have not had that type of size to really impose themselves on the Raptors. And so, yeah, Chicago was a bit of an easy matchup there. But again, like I thought Jacoby just did a great job of switching on the perimeter, tackling, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 different assignments whenever needed. And just applying good ball pressure, executing, like communicating switches. I think that's when the Raptors got burned, was when they didn't talk through some of the switches and they left guys open for threes, or when they were over-helping. At times, Jacoby was over-helping a little bit too. But, you know, ultimately, Chicago was going to shoot a lot of threes. They're going to make a lot of threes. That's kind of like their MO. But they did enough for the Raptors to, like, keep them out of the paint. And I can live with a team just mostly shooting the threes. Like, the Raptors could get enough buckets going the other way. So I thought Jacoby did a great job. And then CMB did a great job too in terms of like his physicality, rolling to the basket, you know, posting up, fronting guys, getting position on the inside, rolling behind the defense, and he was actually like really aggressive around the basket. I think it was a continuation of what he did against Minnesota as well, because like I gave Collin the third star against Minnesota. I know he had a bad plus minus, but I really thought individually he played well. And I thought it was really notable, especially in that first quarter against Minnesota, how often and how aggressive he was looking to finish and score around the basket, even in a game where the matchup didn't like favor him because he was getting guarded by Rudy Gobert, and he's obviously one of the best shot blockers of all time, basically. But Collin was still very aggressive, finding his way to get to the basket, using reverse finishes. And tonight was kind of the same deal. He was actually dunking more of them today. I mean, again, like Chicago had no rim protection. So I actually did ask Darko about it post game. Typically, again, I'm not there post game because I'm here post game trying to go live right afterwards. But one of the benefits was, okay, I got to go to the post game coverage. I actually get to ask a couple questions. It's very funny seeing post game because we had like, I don't know, probably 15 reporters in the room. And typically the PR person will come in and say like, hey, who do you guys want to talk to? Usually like Brandon will come to the podium because he scored 30, or like you grab usually it's two players and the coach after a game that come to the podium. But literally everyone in the room, well, actually I would have been interested to talk to other players, but I didn't want to take up everyone else's time. But everyone was like, nah, just give us Darko and then give us Bobby, right? Basically people were like, we want to talk to Bobby. We don't necessarily want to focus so much on this Raptors Bulls game, with all due respect, which is totally understandable. Again, this was kind of a nothing burger. But I actually did get to ask some questions to Darko post game, which was good. A nice change up. The question I got to ask Darko was, it seemed like Collin was much more aggressive of late this game and the last game in terms of attacking the basket. And before I even finished my question, Darko was like, why do you think that was? And I was like, well, I mean, and then he's like, well, no, seriously, why do you think that was? And I was like, well, I guess, is his thumb feeling better? And he's like, exactly, right? Basically, he had stretches where, depending on sort of how the thumb is feeling from moment to moment, it's obviously going to make him more, shy to shoot the ball, even to grab the ball, even to like be able to sort of like control the ball, basically, because his thumb is in a bit of a tough spot. Darko did agree though that he obviously he has been aggressive going to the basket the last couple of games, and they want to see continued growth and improvement on that front. But he also did pass along an interesting detail, which is that I think he thinks that like they need about 5 weeks for that thumb to get back to like a better spot where maybe he doesn't need to consistently put so much wrap and protection on the thumb. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting exchange, but nevertheless, I thought Collin did a great job. There were even moments where he was dunking so hard that he was like hanging on the rim and stuff like that. So like a lot of that stuff was like, just, it's good to know contextually, right? I think it's, as always, there's a bit of both. Like, I don't think it was necessarily like a criticism of CMB. He's a rookie. Like, he's got like maybe outside of Scotty and Brandon, like the highest approval rating on the entire Raptors team in terms of like who everyone loves. So it's certainly no one was like saying like, okay, like Collin sucks because he was not shooting layups. But I think like there was a curiosity, especially that one play that went viral against the Orlando Magic when he was wide open under the basket and he instantly kicked it out instead of going up and dunking it. But again, like as suspected, him having a really banged up thumb at the moment is a big factor. And obviously, yeah, the Raptors are hoping that with a bit more rest, especially with the trade or with the All-Star break coming up. I know Collin's going to be in the rookie Rising Stars game on next Friday, but that's like one game. There's literally one practice in one game. Like outside of that, it's basically just a big press junket, and then he has like a week off, right? So hopefully he rests a little bit more. But regardless, I thought CMB played great, fantastic, especially against these small ball teams. He's able to use his physicality, absorb like the bumps and the drives. I mean, I think it's like one of the most impressive things when watching Collin these days is when he has to switch onto a guard. Sometimes it's like, especially for big switching on the guards, they have to like switch mid-play as the guard is like already driving. Like they come off the screen and the Raptors guard that is guarding the opposing guard is hung up on a screen, and so they need help, and sometimes they need to switch on the fly. And CMB picks them up, but it's hard because it's like, for a lot of bigs, it's hard because the guard already has some momentum going downhill, and then you're stepping up to meet them. And that initial bump is usually where the fouls occur, right? Of like, oh, you're trying to like wall them off, use physicality, and cut them off. But if you're late to the spot, guards are so good at sort of exaggerating that contact and throwing up some, something to draw a foul, or Sometimes it's just legitimately a blocking foul. That's like that's something that happens a lot. Or they're not aggressive enough and they don't come out, and the guard's able to use that space to either shoot a pull up or just go around and get to the basket. Something that's Collin is so good at, and this is such a niche micro skill, is when he's coming out for that help and he's switching on the fly like that, he not only is able to use his chest to absorb the contact, so there is no foul on a blocking call. He's also shifting his feet really quickly, but he's also strong enough to take that bump from the guard, where a lot of times guards like to get low, maybe like create a bit of an angle and then play off of that angle. But that's contingent on how strong you are to be able to sort of like move your defender backwards or make them shift a direction when they don't expect it. Collin is so good at taking that first bump and absorbing that defensively that I think he's just great at that. He's also great at stripping the ball down low as well. So I just thought Collin played a really good game. And then again, like when the game got like tighter and stuff, there were some moments. I thought Mamu got a bunch of steals in the open court to bail out the Raptors. The only thing you would really say the Raptors didn't do well tonight was have stretches where they weren't taking care of the ball. Overall in the game, they took care of the ball. They were like fine, you know what I mean? Like they didn't. I think they only ended up with 11 turnovers. It's not egregious. That's probably closer to their season average. But I think it's the stretches of games where they just weren't able to handle themselves. Like there was a stretch in the end of the first half where the Raptors had a double-digit lead, but they didn't go up into halftime. They only were up 7 going into halftime. And the reason for that is because they gave away a bunch of points, just turned the ball over for no reason. Scotty of late has really had a bad habit of throwing away passes where they're bad passes and they're either overthrown or they're thrown directly to the opponent. There's been at least like 1 or 2 per game from him. And I feel like, especially as the leader of the team, like I think it's up to him to sort of like really rein in that habit. Because as much as the Raptors want to be aggressive and play on the break, and those are all, it comes from a good place, wanting to share the ball, wanting to follow the game plan. But of course, there's always the right balance of like how you're going to sort of set that tone for the group. So I think that's something for Scotty to sort of improve on. Jamal has had some bad turnovers recently as well. So they've had moments where they had bad turnovers, but tonight they kind of got bailed out because as soon as the Raptors had those turnovers, the Bulls would try to go the other way and break and counterattack basically. And that's where Mamu was getting a lot of like steals in the open court. I guess he was just in the right spot in the right places, but Mamu was also quietly very good. IQ was knocking down his threes and scoring and getting to the spots that he wanted to. And he had shot a lot more, especially with RJ out the game. So they needed more perimeter creation from him, and he stepped up on that front. And then, yeah, ultimately, again, you go back to this, and you could talk about this in a million different ways. Brandon Ingram being the ultimate bucket getter is just fun to watch, man. I mean, tonight, not getting the double teams, even in the second half, when the double teams came, him passing out of those, goes for 33 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists in 35 minutes. Was awesome. Shoots 12 of 20 from the field, hits 5 of his 9 threes. Like, he was just so sick. Didn't turn the ball over much either. Like, it's impressive, man. And it's like coming out of timeouts, every time that the Raptors got down and they needed like something to get their momentum back and swing, they would just run a play for Brandon and he would just score. And that is something that, again, I know the All-Star break is coming up and, All-Star weekend's coming up. I know the Raptors already have so many representatives. Raptors are not being disrespected here. Scotty, CMB, Elijah Martin, Darko, like they have lots of representatives at All-Star weekend, but man, if they could just get one more, I feel like Brandon has been such a big contributor to what the Raptors have done this season. There's been a lot of things that have gone right, but Brandon arguably has been the best thing that has happened to the Raptors in the last year or so. I think today is actually the 1-year anniversary of his arrival in Toronto. I don't think that we could have expected him to play and have this much impact on the team. Even the most optimistic person probably didn't say this. So I think even, sometimes we're so locked in game to game, but when we take a step back, like I just feel really thankful to have him on the team. It's been really fun watching him. I've said this so many times, especially like after seeing him. I remember the first time I saw him play for the Raptors in person was in Calgary. They played like an open team scrimmage. And even just watching the scrimmage, I'm like, oh man, this is just like a level of bucket getting that we haven't had in a while. And I know that like you can overdo it, and sometimes you like rely on a guy to create, in a phone booth too often. Like it limits your overall efficiency. Like those are all valid concerns, but man, having that level of skill, like especially as somebody who like aspires to play a little basketball, obviously at a pickup level, like it's just fun. It's just fun to watch the footwork, the touch, the way he sets up defenders, the way he's able to get into a rhythm, the way he hunts his shots. Like, there's an artistry, and an actual skill level that of scoring the ball that we just haven't had in a while. And there's a purity to his game that I think all hoopers could truly admire. I think going back to even the start of the season when we were looking ahead to what Brandon would look like with the team, Bobby, I think, said it best when he's like, he's a hooper's hooper. And I really, after see him up close, he's a hooper's hooper. And it's one of the main reasons to watch the team. So I know typically I would take some questions and stuff like that, but I'm going to actually just give out the 3 stars now. And then we'll use the sort of the second half of the show to take your questions. But I also wanted to bring you some takeaways from Bobby Webster's press conference. So the 3 stars from tonight's performance, obviously Brandon's going to get the first star, 33 points. Oh yeah, by the way, it was a Prime game as well. Prime, it was broadcast on Prime, which I was a little surprised. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, if I were to pick a game to go on national TV, I'd probably go with last night's game between the Raptors and Timberwolves. That was a fantastic game, really well played. Tonight was a bit of a lopsided game. And obviously Chicago made a ton of trades that rendered their roster pretty, wonky. Like I said, it's a pickup game for them. But nevertheless, on national TV, Brandon Ingram, 33 points. Huge cheer for Glorilla, too, when she showed up midway through the first quarter. The crowd got a huge kick out of it. But yeah, 33 points for Brandon. Super efficient. Awesome game. Second star, I'm going to give that to CMB. I loved his performance tonight. 17 points, 8 of 9 shooting from the field. Was going up strong around the basket, stripping the ball. A steal, 3 blocks, plus 20. Did a great job. Played 37 minutes, too, which, by the way, that's actually something that the Raptors are really looking forward to giving CMB as many minutes as possible. When we skip ahead to taking the takeaways from Bobby Webster's press conference, one of the things he said as a silver lining of Jakob Poeltl's injury, which obviously has been a very difficult for the team to manage, but one of the silver linings has been how much CMB has been able to play. And if you could get a rookie to play 37 minutes in a winning environment, that is so, so rare. And I'm happy that Collin has been able to do that. And I'm so happy that he's been able to actually step up and contribute. I'm really excited about his future in the league. And then your third star, I'm going to give that to Mamu. Mamu stepped up in some really big moments, just got the momentum back on their side. I know IQ had 24 and Jacoby played well. And again, Scotty was in total control the whole night and honestly played at half gear and still dominated. But man, Sandro had some key steals and key moments just to sort of normalize the team. And he was great on the fast break, knocks down some threes, 17 points tonight. I mean, even pump fake sidestep threes against the buzzer, damn, as a big, that's tough. I guess as anybody, it'd be tough, really. You're playing against a shot clock, you're playing against a contest. You got to relocate. And the pump fake sidestep against the closeout, hit the 3 on the buzzer. That's just nasty stuff right there. So usually when Sandro plays well, and again, Sandro plays well when he plays small ball teams, but when he plays well, the Raptors typically win. And 17 points for Sandro tonight, but the 5 rebounds, 3 steals, and a block I thought were really, really important aspects. The Gerald Henderson Award for who randomly torched the Raps. There were obviously a couple candidates to sort of pick from on this front, but I think the biggest one has been Guerschon Yabusele, who drops 15 points and 11 rebounds off the bench. The Bulls actually extended his minutes a ton. He played 33 minutes off the bench, and they were subbing really frequently. I don't know why. They kept subbing every 2 minutes. It's a very weird substitution pattern, but despite him coming off the bench, he actually played almost the most minutes on the team for Chicago because they basically really wanted specifically the matchup of Yabusele guarding CMB. And it's funny because they have similar body types in that they're both really chunky, shorter forwards who are able to play on the perimeter and roll against the basket. But I thought Guerschon actually played quite well. And I know that he hasn't really worked out since coming back to the NBA with the Sixers and the Knicks, and now he's in Chicago. I think there's a real chance he goes back to Europe to play. But tonight, that was the Gershon Yabusele that I saw crush Team Canada in the quarterfinals of the 2024 Olympics in Paris. And that's the player I remember seeing. And that's the guy that dunked on LeBron, basically. But yeah, 15 points and 11 rebounds for Gershon. He was awesome tonight. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from one of our beloved sponsors. And then when we come back, I want to give you guys some takeaways from attending Bobby Webster's press conference. Again, apologies that the pod was delayed, but I hope some of the takeaways and even the first-hand reporting is going to be worth it. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This segment is brought to you by Table Fare and Social. Get your pregame bites and after-work drinks at Table.
It's a great location, right across the street from the arena and just steps away from Union Station and the Metrolinx bus terminal.
Will, you know I love my wedge salad, but there's plenty of options at table. What should we have next?
Oh, we can have salad for days, my friend.
Oh, you're talking about salad days? You know I love salad days, man. They got a different salad for every day of the week. You can never get tired of the options there.
Oh yeah, I heard about this place. This was your go-to lunch spot forever. You always said the lettuce was so crispy.
Man, it's so crispy and fresh, and now this can be your go-to meal before Raptors games.
I like that. Grab a pregame salad at Table Fare and Social right across from the arena. Okay, welcome back to the program. So we're going to talk about the takeaways from Bobby Webster's press conference. He spoke after the game tonight. Basically, I know the time kept shifting. Like, it was supposed to happen before the game, and then they got moved to maybe halftime, and then it got pushed to postgame. To go through the very boring logistics of it, the league office essentially needs to have everybody get, like general managers and stuff. They need to get on the phone. They need to confirm trade details with the league. And so the league schedules call times for when they actually jot down the trades and officially make it official, basically, right? There is a queue, like a literal queue that forms. So this is basically like going to Service Ontario on a very busy day. And so, like, you have to literally process one trade call at a time. And so the Raptors scheduled trade calls for both their original trade, which actually was already done, in advance with Ochai going to Brooklyn and the Raptors getting Chris Paul and some savings or whatever. That was already confirmed, but the other trade with the Warriors and getting Trayce Jackson-Davis, that took a while for the league to essentially schedule that call, and that's why the timing of that schedule kept shifting. And that's why ultimately I stayed for the entire game. Actually, it was kind of nice watching the entire game, I'm not going to lie to you. Not having to scramble and literally scurry home during halftime was kind of a nice adjustment. Even getting to talk post-game. I know we only brought Darko out, but even getting a question into post-game I thought was kind of fun. Again, like, it was something I don't typically do because I want to make the podcast the priority. But yeah, so anyway, takeaways from Bobby Webster and the press conference that he held. So he didn't really speak for too long. I mean, again, that's maybe partially on us for not having as many questions. I would have loved to sort of, had basically everyone asking questions nonstop and sort of asking maybe and keeping him for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We've seen press conferences. I guess I certainly got used to like the Masai press conferences, which were like sometimes upwards to an hour, where he would talk about pretty much everything. But again, Masai is obviously much more like, he's more expressive, and he pontificates a lot. I think Bobby is maybe expressive in his own way, but maybe kind of like more kept to himself, and certainly was not trying to elaborate too much further beyond the question that was sort of asked of him. I think if you compare who's the better like public speaker, obviously Masai would be. But nevertheless, I think part of it was also, it just wasn't a particularly eventful trade deadline. A couple things that stood out, though, in terms of answers to questions that I had in my mind. First off, I did ask him about the fact that obviously RJ Barrett, his name came up very frequently in trade rumors. If you've been following the Raptors at all of late, you've definitely heard RJ's name almost more than anybody else in terms of the trade market. So I asked Bobby outright, like, first off, yes, we've heard RJ's name in the trade rumors a lot. Do you see RJ Barrett as a long-term future fit for the Raptors and this current core? Two things he addressed with that. Number one, he said, look, the trade rumors, they just are what they are. He was always in constant communication with RJ, with Jakob, with their agents as well, just to basically tell them, like, look, there are going to be always discussions, but unless you hear it directly from us, nothing's happening. And when something does happen, we will let you know, right? So I think that, like, I'm hoping, especially because those guys are vets. They've been in league, like they've both been traded before. Jack's been traded, twice to the Raptors, away from the Raptors. RJ's been traded, obviously, to the Raptors from the Knicks. So they've gone through this process and they understand it, and they're also a bit older and obviously more mature. But they were in consistent conversation, and Bobby did dismiss some of those trade rumors as just kind of like rumors, I think the other part that he talked about, which I thought was interesting, was just sort of the fit with RJ. Obviously, he acknowledged that the Raptors. I mean, I think his words were, "When RJ plays, we win," which I think is pretty big. You know what I mean? Like, I think the point of the game is to win, right? You know, and I think that really does acknowledge the reality of the season, which was that the Raptors were in a great. The best moments they had in the season were obviously in November when they went on that stretch of winning like 13 to 14 games, and RJ was healthy for most of that. In fact, that run pretty much ended when RJ got hurt. And that coincided with their coldest stretch of the season, which was they couldn't score offensively, and a lot of that obviously was lacking some of the secondary scoring provided by RJ. Also, Jakob being hurt in that stretch wasn't helpful. So nevertheless, like, obviously healthy player is productive, but I also think that it was noteworthy that he said right after that, like, look, we kind of have to evaluate everybody after the season. And I think that, how much you contribute towards winning, especially winning at the highest level, especially looking ahead to the playoffs, if they get to the playoffs and the play in or whatever they end up in, how that performance, shows is going to be affecting the team long term. I think that's interesting because, I think for me, in my overall impression, and this is not from like private conversations I've had with the front office, but this is just even in terms of how they come across publicly, it always feels like RJ is kind of a secondary thought for a lot of these guys, and that's always the impression you get. So it almost feels like sometimes there's like the fan base is higher on RJ versus like sort of how the team talks about him. And I actually really appreciated even just Bobby stating the obvious in this case, which was basically like the Raptors have a strong winning record with RJ in the lineup. Even just that level of acknowledgement I thought was productive. We also got some answers on some other things. Shouts to friend of the program, Marshall Kong, who I gotta give a big shout out to Marshall because English is his second language. He grew up and like went to school in China, and so he came to Toronto to cover the basketball because that's his dream, and it's always very admirable when someone tries to do that. But I also think that like the Raptors media corps in particular have a few people who are English is their second language. It's obviously not. It's the most common thing in the world, especially in Toronto, to have people who are not like native English speakers. And so sometimes, that can get a little nervous, especially considering you're doing public speaking at a very public way at a press conference. But Marshall got over a bit of his shyness and actually asked, I thought, one of the more poignant questions to Bobby, which was basically, look, what would you say to fans who have seen a lot of reports about the Raptors making a big trade, and ultimately the Raptors did not make that big trade? And Bobby kind of took a bit of a pause just to sort of like consider the question, and then talked about sort of like, look, I think he wanted people to keep the bigger picture in mind, to be patient with the group. He acknowledged that, like, there are going to be times where the Raptors will ultimately push their chips all in, and they will be willing to trade picks for the right trades and the right moments. But on the whole, they have made good strides this season. A lot of the moves they have made have worked. The team is definitely more watchable year to year. And he did preach patience with this situation, which to me, I think is reasonable, right? Like, I think coming into the year, and I think Bobby even acknowledged this part too, is just that like the start of the year when the Raptors won at such a high rate and they raced out to the second seed at the start of the season, like it kind of adjusted expectations for everybody, and therefore it feels like now it's somehow not as satisfactory to be in this spot where you're 9 games over 500 just heading into the trade deadline or into the All-Star break, which I think anybody would have reasonably took. That's not to say the team is perfect, but they're still a young team on the way up, and I think they were patient. He did assure that, like, look, the team is going to be aggressive. Like, when they see the opportunity to push the chips all in, they're going to do it. So yeah, I just thought that was a pretty prudent answer to all of that. One of the big questions, obviously, around the team is the health of Jakob Poeltl. That was actually addressed by both Darko and Bobby. I actually feel a little bit bad for Darko because the coach has to speak more than anyone else on the team. Like, Bobby will speak like, I don't know, 3-4 times a year. And by the way, that is actually more than the average GM would typically speak. GMs typically speak like, I mean, there's GMs like the Knicks, like they speak like once every 3 or 4 years. You know what I mean? So, this is actually more access than usual, let's say, compared to NBA standard. But, Bobby obviously speaks like 3 or 4 times, end of the season, start of the season, at the draft, and at the trade deadline, right? Those are the four. But Darko has to talk every day, like practice, pregame, postgame. That's pretty much like usually 5 to 7 times a week. And every single time he does a press conference, he is asked about like how's Jakob, how's his back. Whatever, it's part of the job. Obviously, there's annoying things to everyone's job, and certainly everybody involved in the NBA are well compensated for the work that they do. But I did appreciate that we actually got an answer from someone other than Darko about sort of Jakob's condition. Look, it's been unfortunate, right? And I think that first and foremost, the Raptors reassured that like they feel confident in Jakob Poeltl's condition. Confidence is one thing. Performance is the ultimate thing, especially in sports. And the truth of the matter is he has not been available, and it's been basically handcuffing their entire situation and a bit of their season, at large. The Raptors have succeeded in spite of Jakob, but certainly there are matchups that they just straight up don't have a chance to win without Jakob. Not saying that they would win those with Jakob, but they just don't have a chance to win without him. They need him on the team, considering he is the only 7-footer on the team. They paid him a lot too, which that was not specifically addressed at this year's deadline. And maybe a potential regret of mine to not make a second question to ask about Jakob's extension. But ultimately, like, they feel confident in Jakob. They feel that like they can play. And I think that the one thing Bobby also added is like, look, none of us here in this room are like 7 feet tall with a bad back. Okay. Like it's kind of a bit of a unique situation. And I think that they do ultimately feel confident that he can come back. Whether that actually happens though is, to be seen, and to what level he can come back at is to be seen. Certainly we've seen Jakob go through more warm-ups. I've seen him go through more vigorous workouts in practice. They are not certainly game, type of reps. I didn't see him play in like the get ready game, for example. Typically they have like the end of like third stringers who don't usually play night to night. What they'll do at the end of practice will be they'll gather them, and then they'll have them play against like assistant coaches and get like actual, I guess, like practice reps, like scrimmage reps, basically. Haven't seen Jakob in that step yet, so I think that's, something to be considered there as well. Even today, I saw Jakob go through his warm-up, but then kind of like just cut it short and went back to the locker room. I wasn't totally sure what that was about. But in any case, like, the front office is confident in Jakob, and so ultimately it's up to Jakob and a bit of luck, obviously, for that to be repaid in any sort of circumstance. Aside from that, I think that, especially talking to a few people in the building, especially over the last couple of days, even some people outside of the building, a couple things really came to mind. Number one, I know there was a lot of talk about the Raptors wanting Sabonis, and it was certainly reported in many different outlets. It kind of became like, at first it was Jake Fisher and Mark Stein, and then Sam Amick jumped in, and then it just became like one of these rumors that felt almost inevitable because you just kept hearing it from all sides that the Raptors wanted Sabonis and the Raptors going to get Sabonis, and it was on, it wasn't on, maybe details came in, whatever. My impression of it, especially as we sit post trade deadline and the Raptors obviously don't have Domantas Sabonis, I think a lot of that interest was overstated. I think there is certainly something going on between Sacramento and Sabonis long term. Feels like they're headed for a split, and that split ultimately may land him in Toronto in some time. Clearly, it hasn't done that at this year's trade deadline. And even some of the details that came out when the Raptors were only offering like second round picks, for example, I think that feels kind of consistent with the idea that like there certainly is interest in a split from Sacramento, but I don't know if that interest from Toronto is as strong as it was initially suggested. I also think that like there is a feeling that, look, it's not the Raptors don't want to go all in, but if you look at some of the trades that took place tonight and in the last week or so, there wasn't particularly a lot of trades that felt either that would fit two things. Number one, it will fit long term for the group, and that would be worth throwing in like multiple first round picks, which will be like probably the most valuable thing the Raptors can offer outside of throwing in like CMB, which they're obviously not going to do, or throwing in like their star players, right? If you look at the trades that were made today, and I actually want to ask this with what just to the audience here watching too, but is there a trade that you wish the Raptors got in on and paid that price or an equivalent to that price from Toronto's asset base? Yes, the Raptors need to upgrade the roster, and those positions are to be seen. I think it was also interesting that I forget whose question it was, but Bobby talked about, we're still in the talent acquisition phase, and kind of regardless of sort of the fit around the current team, they just need to add more talent. So it wasn't necessarily they were adding just one position or one thing of need. They still just need to improve their talent base, regardless of sort of, what specific skill that was, right? So that's kind of interesting to me because they're not looking for the finishing piece. They're still looking for another, probably a third piece really to complement obviously Scotty and Brandon. And ideally a third star piece, right? But was there a trade out there that both fit the Raptors timeline, which is younger, which has a couple years on it, and also was worth throwing in, let's say, 2 firsts to do? I look around and it's like the AD trade cost 2 firsts. Ultimately, they're not 2 great firsts, but of course the Raptors don't have surplus firsts, so they have to throw in their own. He's older. He would have required the Mavericks to say yes to taking Yak, which obviously I think that would have been a concern for rightful reasons. Would have required giving up RJ, and AD is not healthy yet, and he's also 32 and is due for an extension. I wouldn't say that that's like a guarantee to go for it. Again, the Sabonis thing, from my understanding, I just don't think Toronto was as interested as maybe the reports made it seem. Certainly, they're looking for a split, and obviously, if you're looking for a split, Sacramento's going to want the biggest return. But and I think that the Raptors only offering second round picks is kind of reflective of like, yeah, I mean, I guess we'll do it, but like we're not giving you a lot for it. So maybe obviously there was a discussion there. Again, I think that the turd in the punch bowl in this whole situation is Jakob and how big of a contract he has, and obviously the fact that he's injured. Like that is pretty much a impossible trade piece to have right now. But like, I see the chat here talking about Zubac, for example. The Zubac trade, and I know it's like very exciting, and I think for Indiana, it's more worth it for them because they have a much more win now timeline. They have just gone to the conference finals, and then they went to the NBA finals, and they lost literally in Game 7. And we all remember how fun that whole run was. Certainly, I've been a big admirer of what Indiana has done, and the Raptors have been too. They've even copped some of their strategies to adapt to their own, which is always something that happens with a copycat league. But so obviously they have a more win now pressure, and Zubac is a very good player. Like, don't get me wrong. I think I've really valued Zubac. I think he's like a borderline all-star player. And they need a center so badly. They need a center really badly. They have been crushed with size. They need some defense. They need rebounding. They need his finishing. All that's great. And I think it's a great fit for Indiana. The only question mark I would have is how much can they run with him on the floor, considering he's not like a fast player really that can like, play at that high of a pace, which is Indiana's core identity. But whatever, that's secondary to how well of a player he is. The cost, like, I think from Toronto's perspective, if the Raptors jumped in and threw 2 unprotected firsts at Ivica Zubac, I would be on the postgame, I guess I would be on the live reaction, stream, calling the Raptors out for making a wildly risky move. And I will be on the postgame repeating how wildly risky that move is. 2 unprotected firsts is unheard of in today's league, and especially considering those are firsts that are, I think one was 2020, I think one's this year and another one's like 2029, I think. I mean, this year it's protected or whatever, right? It's protected, I think 1 through 4 and then 10 through 30. So basically, if it's not 5 through 10 or 5 through 9, it's not going to convey this year, and then it will convert to an unprotected 2031 first. Who knows what Indiana's going to look like in 2029 and 2031, but 2 unprotected firsts in those years is just, again, like something, especially considering the odds of the lottery are so flat now. Like, it's almost unheard of. Like they got more for Zubac than like AD got, for example, like much more actually than what AD got. There's a reason why people went like they were so confused about Atlanta or New Orleans making that trade with Atlanta to get the number 12th pick, which was Derek Queen, and they ultimately gave up an unprotected first of their own for the year. It's just unheard of almost in today's league. So that was certainly a very high price. And I didn't want the Raptors to pay that high of a price for Zubac, even though I think he's a fantastic player and he would be an upgrade over Jakob. Like, especially given Jakob's health and even just what there are abilities-wise as a player, he is a better player than Jakob. There's no doubt, right? But that's a really high price. Past that, there may be some secondary deals you maybe could have jumped in on. I would assume it would have been interesting. I think he really is an intriguing player, and he's had a good season with Chicago, there's no doubt. But he's due for a payday, and the Raptors have already decided, essentially, we are going to pay Mamu. And part of the reason they get under the luxury tax is so that they can pay Mamu. So, like, you can't really pay Ayo going forward and Mamu, right? Maybe you could have swapped out RJ for some of those other players, but, again, like, it seems like the Raptors have some, at least they've acknowledged RJ provides value. Okay, that's actually way more than what we've seen in previous years. Vucevic going for an expiring, again, he's 35, fits a more win now profile for Boston than he does Toronto. I don't know. You tell me, was there a move that like really that you wanted the Raptors to jump in on and pay that exact price? I think obviously for the Raptors, they had calls, they're aggressive, they're always going to be involved. I would say, from my knowledge of how the front office operates and my limited knowledge, let's say, I'm trying to be humble with this, very limited knowledge. Part of the reason you hear the Raptors in so many trade discussions and trade reports is that they're not necessarily strict about if other agents or even teams, let's say, but obviously definitely other agents want to drum up interest for their clients and throw the Raptors in there. I think it's partially evident by the fact that the Raptors get thrown in and connected to literally every player available, okay? That doesn't mean the Raptors are interested in every player available. So there's that aspect. And I think, look, the main motivation for the Raptors in the trade deadline, and this is something Bobby said on record too, was just you need to obviously get under the tax. You had Ochai to do that. And they need to add some, an extra layer of insurance at the center position. I think I was also listening to Bobby's interview with Blake Murphy on Sportsnet towards the end of the fourth quarter on the broadcast. And one thing he actually acknowledged was like, one thing we learned from this year is we need bigs. I was like, thank you. Again, a bit of stating the obvious, similar to saying like, RJ contributes to winning, but like a bit of stating the obvious, but it's also not been something that the team has really followed suit action-wise, right? They have not stocked the team with bigs. So even him saying that we actually need bigs and we need depth at bigs, like it's the most obvious thing in the world. But I think sometimes even stating the obvious can sort of really confirm that everyone's living in the same reality. It makes you feel more trust and comfort in sort of how how the team is going to be managed. But in any case, I think they like Trayce Jackson-Davis for, to some degree. They're not like trumping him up. You never really heard Darko talk too effusively about him. And same thing with Bobby. I mean, I think Bobby's biggest thing was just like, hey, I remember watching him for the first time playing in a Team USA sort of tournament at St. Catharines. And he was there to probably scout other players, but he, obviously took notice of him at that time. I think like they need somebody who can be physical and active, decently athletic from the position as well. And especially given a time where the Raptors, not just this season, but they have a really cheap team option for him next year. We'll obviously see how he fits with the group and, how the coach likes him and how the rest of the team sort of adapts to him. But I don't really see like a huge issue there. He seems like a pretty nice kid. Like they have a very cheap team option on him for next year at $2.4 million. It's for like, and they gave up a Lakers first round or second round pick, which is basically going to be like 51st or 52nd pick in that range. The Lakers obviously are a pretty good team. That's fine. You know what I mean? That does acknowledge something in the meantime. It's not a long-term solution in the sense that like it's not like a silver bullet solution. doesn't upgrade you at the center position. It just gives you more depth. But they've needed depth for a long time. And I think part of the thinking too, and I salute Cash for asking this question, Joseph Kashar The Score, who obviously has come on the show many times, but Cash asked the question of, is a part of the consideration of how the Raptors manage the center position, is part of the consideration Collin Murray-Boyles and keeping minutes available for him? And Bobby immediately said, yes, you saw obviously even tonight, CMB played 37 minutes. That's not going to happen for most rookies. And they clearly they see the very obvious thing with Collin, right? Like they see the value, they see the fit, they see how smart he is, and they see how, like, the baseline is already so high. To use the cliche that I know Alex hates, like, this is the worst he's ever going to be. They want to leave room for him to play. So yes, if they can go out there and get, Nikola Jokic tomorrow, then yeah, probably Collin, you're going to have to cut your minutes down and we're going to play someone else at center. But like especially considering the long-term future of this team and how they might fit, I know Collin's not going to be a center full-time long-term. But at least having the option to spot some minutes for him there is going to be a good thing. I think for me, and I've raised this point up, privately as well, is just, it's not just about whether or not you have the option to put Collin at center or Scotty at center, which certainly there are advantages to doing that sometimes, and the Raptors see that. But there are matchups where you just kind of need somebody to, absorb the hits, take the hits for that game. And you're probably going to lose some of those minutes, but I think in the long term, saving those miles against these like bruising centers who are way more physical. And I'm not trying to say this to Jackson Davis, like, yo, you're basically a crash test dummy and you just got to go in there and literally get, take the punishment. But, there are some nights where I don't want Collin and Scotty to take the hits. Tonight, and when the Raptors play small ball, and by the way, half the teams are basically like built like that now. So on half the nights, there's no problem. Like, run the team as is, and they clearly have some advantages, especially playing small, playing aggressive, playing physical, using their length, quickness, all that stuff is good. But there are matchups where you need somebody to take the hits. And, again, if you're able to duck attacks, you're able to sort of have somebody manage some of those, that's fine. On the smaller things, like, Chris Paul, the future Chris Paul, it was interesting, talking about Chris Paul and maybe what the Raptors will do with Chris Paul. And I'm going to put, some of the jokes aside. It does feel kind of sad because after the Raptors acquired Chris Paul, they didn't get any calls about Chris Paul. Nobody called about Chris Paul. Maybe that's because everyone just expects for Chris to be bought out eventually, and then they can sign him directly. So they don't necessarily need to trade somebody off the roster to make that happen. But I also think that that's pretty reflective of like just the fact that there isn't much interest in Chris. Look, the Raptors are going to buy him out, right? They've already said that on record, and he's only nominally with the team considering he's just is technically on the team. But there just straight up isn't value for him, and I think that that's why he's gone ignored for the entire season. I mean, the fallout with the Clippers, that was like early December, and it's been 2 months now. And the Raptors only took him on because the Clippers threw in some money to go towards Brooklyn as part of that salary dump for Ochai, and it was an accounting move from both Toronto and the Clippers' perspective. But the Raptors didn't take on Chris Paul with any intention to keep Chris Paul or to use him and bring him on as a veteran mentor. I think they're respectful of the fact that, look, Chris is probably not interested in playing for the Raptors right now. I think Chris, obviously, especially considering this is his last year, probably wants to latch on with the winning team, maybe chase a ring. Obviously, he hasn't won a ring in his very illustrious career. But, yeah, I think I don't know. At a certain point, I just got a little sad because, like, dog, nobody wanted Chris Paul. Would have been, it's just kind of an absurd thing to say. Even Bobby himself kind of chuckled, and he said to himself, like, "Yo, Chris Paul was one of my favorite players." And I think, like, there was probably a period before Bobby obviously became an NBA front office guy, and obviously you got to put fandom to the side at that point. You got to put the job first. But even, and I know obviously he grew up playing basketball, and he obviously is a big basketball fan. prior to that, obviously appreciates the game. Like, you got to think about it. Like, first off, like, Chris Paul is like basically the same age as Bobby. I think Bobby's like 41. Chris Paul is like 40. Um, like, young Chris Paul was a phenom. And I think everyone understands that. So I think he even acknowledged, he kind of laughed. He's like, Chris Paul was one of my favorite players. So it's kind of weird having him and trading for him and being in dialogue with his agent. But obviously he's not going to be here long term. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, the interesting thing too is just like there has been such a strong reaction to the Raptors trade deadline. Maybe it's just like I'm looking in the wrong circles in terms of what my Twitter algorithm pushes out towards me in terms of seeing the Raptors discussions there, or like I'm fairly I look at Raptors Reddit a lot. I look at Raptors GM, real GM, like, like it just seems like there's like a lot of angst is my read on the situation, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the like at least outwardly online, there's definitely a lot of angst around the Raptors trade deadline, and I think that certainly this is not a good team. Sorry, certainly this is not a great team. Sorry, they're a good team. They're not a great team, and they could use upgrades, and there are definitely frustrations to be had with the value of IQ's contract, and Jakob Poeltl's extension. Again, that's my bad. I should have thought more on the spot to ask a question about the the Jakob Poeltl extension. That's been a big point of discussion, and so that's my bad not asking that at the press conference. I just didn't think about it at that time. But like, if I really had a read on it, I think it's just a consternation of like the Raptors being linked to everybody and everything getting discussed. And so when you have so many things pop up reporting wise, and it gets discussed each time, when at the very end you have what was like the most likely outcome. Like, there was maybe like a, I don't know, ballpark 20% chance the Raptors made a big trade and 80% chance they made a small trade, deduct the tax, and add depth at center, which is exactly what they did. When reality struck and that 80% hit, like, I think because of all that discussion, all that consternation, like, that leads to it feeling anticlimactic no matter what. And like, there's definitely upgrades that need to be made to the roster. I think that there are maybe concerns over sort of how it's built, and they have to manage it. Like, managing a team is very fluid, and it's going to require both vision and also adaptations over the course of the season, and how sort of things come up and you address the foreseen circumstances, like for example Yak's back being blown out for the year. But like, on the whole, I just don't really see like how this year's trade deadline was some sort of mismanagement or even this huge missed opportunity. And again, I'm happy to be wrong on that front. I would love for people to sort of even give me some feedback in terms of what perspective I'll be missing. I know a lot of people get mad at this and they're like, oh, Bobby, like you're hiding things for Bobby. Like look, I could put whatever relationship on the line against like my actual fandom of the Raptors. It doesn't matter who it is, man. Like, I'm a fan of the Raptors first and foremost. I'm loyal to the fan, and I do have enough integrity as a person, I would say, to put that above any sort of relationships. It's not like I haven't criticized Bobby, Darko, Masai, Fred, Pascal, Scotty, OG, any of the players that were here, even Kyle going back in the days, DeMar. Like, maybe it's not the same critiques that people want to hear, and maybe I'm not reflecting that angle, but I don't really think that, like, I don't know. I think there might be blind spots, and that's why I want to encourage a discussion. And I think that's pretty important. I want to know what other people are thinking, and that's why I spend so much time seeing the feedback on the team, and spending enough time, like, with other fans and getting a sense of sort of the feelings where there are. I think professionally it's good for me too, because I want to have a good sense of the temperature of the fan base. But like, yeah, like, I will want to know, basically. I guess even putting my side from this, like, were you guys happy with the trade deadline? Was there a move that you wish the Raptors would have gone in on at the equivalent price? And what are your thoughts on the trade deadline? Obviously, it's like anticlimactic. Like, I agree with that as well. Like, there's a part of me that's like, why did I spend so much time scrolling and thinking about it? And obviously we talked about it a lot on the show, so it's not like we're not independent from this, but that's also a factor. Do you know what I mean? Like where the team currently stands, management wise. I think they still have the bullets left in the gun to sort of go for it. I just didn't really see any of the targets that were made available at this year's trade deadline or trades that were consummated at this year's trade deadline. I didn't see that as a missed opportunity, and so therefore the Raptors did the more reasonable thing, which was to sort of make a small step, get out the tax, and ultimately add a little bit of depth, but basically keep rolling with the group. So I'm going to take one last break, and then we'll get back and get to your questions. All right? There you go.
Hey man, you've been working really hard this season on the podcast. I think it's time you take a break.
I agree with you. I was looking at the calendar and I saw I got a bit of a week off, and I think I'm going to make a trip to one of my favorite cities in the world, Mexico City.
Oh man, I love Mexico City, man. Well, one of the things to figure out, you got to book a spot there, man. You going to be using Airbnb?
Of course. Last time I was in CDMX, I did use Airbnb, and I found an amazing spot. It was in Roma, one of my favorite neighborhoods, and the best part about it, I still think about it to this day, it had this personal patio on the rooftop. You're able to wake up every morning to all this sunlight, which you do not get a lot of in the winter where we are, and I might just go right back to that same spot.
Yeah, now that you talk about it, I kind of want to go on a trip too, man. I think I banked about like 15 vacation days in April. Probably gonna go with some friends, maybe 6-7 of them, and man, I gotta find a spot that's spacious and in a good location.
Okay, well, first off, I hope I get that invite, okay? But while you're looking for that, have you checked out the guest favorites feature? It shows you the most well-loved places by guests, the highest rated scores, and I think it's just a great way to find the spot that you're looking for, so that you can live like a local and outside of all the tourist areas.
Yo, that's a great call, man. All right, let's both take a break, book our trip, and use Airbnb.
Okay, let's get to your questions. I appreciate you guys for being patient again. I know the Rack Pod came on late, and typically I would get to your questions a lot earlier than this, but it's trade deadline, special circumstance and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's get to the questions. Yeah. First one from Donkey. Bobby finishing the stream by saying he needs a big expiring next year to use in a trade was hilarious. Not looking good for RJ's long-term future. You know what? I didn't even realize that, but that is a very funny observation. I think the question was sort of like asked in terms of, obviously the Raptors have a lot of long-term salary, and especially at this year's trade deadline, one of the more valuable commodities in this specific market was expiring salary. Obviously, you look at the deals Washington made, with Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum, getting back Trae Young and Anthony Davis. Like, a lot of that was made possible by the fact that they had expiring salaries to throw into those deals. Yeah, obviously, like, depending on whatever, the game state is at any given moment, okay? Like, certain things are more valuable. Some years picks are more valuable because the draft is good. Some years, expiring salary is more valuable because they need flexibility. Some years, expiring salary is less valuable because free agency, that class sucks. Like, it literally changes. Like, the value is not fixed from year to year and position to position. But, yeah, I think, this is something I brought up a lot in the course of our trade discussions, which was like, I know the Raptors obviously have been linked to a lot of guys, but you got to realize that the Raptors were either going to make a big trade, which meant trading like starters, probably multiple starters, or they were going to make a small trade, which would involve Ochai's contract and potentially maybe attaching like Grady or, some other small piece to that to sort of like get to a certain number point. But based on the way the Raptors contracts are structured at this given moment, there weren't many trades available to the team with the objective of staying under luxury tax. And being able to match salary, because we didn't have expiring salaries and we didn't have mid-tier salaries just pieced together. So something that Bobby also talked about in response to that was last year they have obviously Bruce Brown's contract, which I know he literally talked about ad nauseum about we got optionality with Bruce Brown's contract. I remember even talking to him like off the record about it. He would use the same words, and I'm like, Bobby, what the hell does that even mean? Like, what do you mean we're bragging about optionality? But having that expiring chip and even Kelly Olynyk's small salary to sort of tap into things, like that's how they were able to, get to Brandon in the first place without really removing much from the roster. This year, any players that were contributing to the roster were already getting paid well, and any players that weren't contributing to the roster weren't making enough money to add in, a new player off of that. The only thing really you had with Ochai, And considering the calculus they had, basically they need to ship out Ochai and bring back less than $3 million, I believe. And that was to keep enough room from the luxury tax, while also, in my opinion, I think they should also do what a lot of other teams did around the league today, which was after the trade deadline, you clear some roster spots. And a lot of teams you saw convert their two-way players and sign them into long-term deals. For example, Philadelphia did that with Dominic Barlow, and I think the Celtics also did that with Amari Williams. I don't. No one's ever watched Amari Williams like this, or not ever, but like very few people know who I'm talking about. Maybe 1% of the audience knows who I'm talking about. That guy's very talented. He's like 6'10", can handle the ball, and is very athletic. Imagine like Robert Williams, Time Lord, who used to play for the Celtics as well. Imagine Time Lord with that athleticism and shot blocking, but could also handle the ball a little bit. Like Celtics got a nice one there. Saw him play a little bit with the main Red Claws. Against the Raptors 905, and that's where I took notice of him. But like, yeah, when you have these two-way contract guys, like a lot of times trade deadline, you clear out some salary spaces and then you like convert their contract. Part of the advantages of obviously hitting on these smaller contracts, I know this is more boring, but like I think it's important, but you can create a pretty valuable player in that spot because of the fact that when you convert a two-way guy, you can usually try to sign them to like a 4-year or 3-year deal, maybe 3 years plus an option at the end of it, but like basically a 3-year minimum deal, which is obviously for a guy who's playing, anybody who's productive on a minimum deal is like absurdly valuable. Like you look at Mamu, for example, Mamu's not getting the minimum, but he's getting paid just over the minimum, and he's obviously a contributing player. Like you're getting so much production from that small of a salary slot. If you're able to lock a guy like that in for like 3 years, is huge, right? Even for the Raptors getting Trace Jackson-Davis in this trade, part of the reason he retained value for Golden State is because when he was first drafted, I think he was in the 50s, off his rookie season where he had a good rookie season, they converted his contract and they signed him to like a 4-year or a 3-year deal, I believe. And they still have time left on that deal to trade to the Raptors. I think it was a 4-year deal actually with the team option at the end. So that's what made him still valuable, even in a trade to Toronto, like for example, at this year's deadline, right? So I know it's a very minute thing and it's kind of boring to talk about, but I do think that whenever they resolve the situation with Chris Paul, and I think they have until I think March 1st is the buyout deadline, so it's not going to be long. Like maybe, if a team wants to sign Chris Paul tomorrow, I think the Raptors will buy him out and you sign for that team. Like that's kind of how it will go, right? But ultimately, the Raptors have until I believe March 1st for Chris Paul to be eligible to be bought out and still sign with a team and be eligible for the playoffs. So I don't think this will last more than like let's say 2-3 weeks, but whenever that situation is resolved, I hope that they actually take that money and that extra roster spot, and I hope they convert Elijah Martin. I think that there's a good long-term potential there, and especially with Elijah already being 24, and I'm very confident that he can contribute. He basically can come in and do what Ochai does. Like I'm almost guaranteed that he can already do that right now, and obviously that's the player that they just shed from the roster, but if you're able to convert Elijah at the end of that, you are getting him on his age 24, 25, 26, maybe even 27 seasons at basically the minimum. I mean, it would suck a little bit for Elijah to have so much of his earning potential locked into that, but nevertheless, you're getting guaranteed to an NBA deal. I think that's always going to be worthy of celebration. But yeah, I think that will be a really good move subsequently for Toronto in this. Yeah. That's a very long question. That's a very long answer and very nerdy answer. But I mean, I guess I've been inundated in trade deadline stuff for a lot, so I'm just nerding out a little bit. Another question was from Donkey. First time I've seen Jamal Shed volleyball spike block somebody. Yeah, that was against Yuki, who is the 5'8" Japanese point guard. I mean, he's sick. Like honestly, he's his handle is great. He's very quick. He's really good distributor. Like he even had 11 assists tonight in like 15 minutes, so that's like really good. But he is very small, man. Like he looks like a bit of a child out there. Again, I mean, obviously relative to like NBA players. We're talking about the average NBA player is like 6'7". So like to be 5'8" out there, you're gonna look out of place. But yeah, Jamal Shed blocked the shit out of him on a try. He got blocked the way Jamal gets blocked is the way I would describe it. So it happens, man. Let's do a couple more in terms of the trade deadline. What's up with Matty D recently? He sounds different. I didn't watch the broadcast at all today because I was at the game for the entire time. Typically, I would at least watch half the broadcast, if not the whole broadcast. I did have a long chat with Matty D before the game. We just kind of hung out and just talked, just talk ball basically. He always makes sure to check in on the show, and he's always rooting for us, and he's keeping track. He's always like, oh, you guys are like always number one or number two, trading places with Zach Lowe in Canada, and I'm like, yeah, I wish Zach Lowe wasn't, one of the GOAT podcasters, and it was just us definitively at number one would be nice, but no, but he's always checking in, and he's always asking stuff, so appreciate Matt and his support. I didn't really sound like he sounded different to me on the broadcast, so I'd be curious about that. Streets are asking, has Matty D ever been on the show? Yeah, we get Matt we've made it a tradition essentially to get Matt to start the season in training camp. So we got him last year when we were in Montreal. We brought him to one of our friends out there in Montreal. They run, a recording studio. Shouts to Kevin. And we did a hilarious episode there. And then we did the same thing this time around when we were in Calgary for training camp. We brought Matt Devlin in, and we spent the day with him. Grab lunch. Matt's literally the homie, man. He's great, and he obviously, it goes without saying that it's always an excellent episode when Matt is on with us. Question from Clayton: was Chuck Swirsky in the building? He's been quiet on socials. Yeah, Chuck was in the building. Yeah, of course. He's the play-by-play broadcaster for the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, he was longtime broadcaster for both Raptors on TV and also the Raptors on radio. I believe him and Jack launched the first ever Raptors radio show, like way before, like way before me and Alex, launched, Raptor Show, which is obviously now hosted by Blake and Matt Bonner. Like way before we launched that in like 2021, they had the original. So, sometimes I have to, they don't remind me of it, but sometimes when I look at them, I'm like, oh yeah, like nothing in this world is new. You know what I mean? You certainly gotta, give credit to the OGs, but yeah, Chuck was in the building, and I didn't get a chance to talk to Chuck, but we also had Chuck on the podcast last year as well. We talked a lot about what it was early years in his career, and we talked a lot about Vince in that period too, because he was around for both the high highs and the low lows, and he had told a great story about, well, not a great story, I would say, in terms of it's not heartwarming, but he told a very vulnerable story about sort of his falling out with Vince Carter and him trying to apologize to Vince. I don't think, to my knowledge, Vince ever really accepted that apology, but I don't know. I wasn't around for that, to those details, so it was very interesting to hear that. And I think, especially someone who works in media, I'm always interested in hearing how some of those relationships can be managed on the bigger picture there. We also got some money from the chat, so I appreciate you guys. Collin sent in $5. Since I ain't watching the podcast anymore, if the white guy rapping Jamaican doesn't become the theme song moving forward. Okay, first off, it's not Jamaican. Okay, it's patois. There is a difference, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have the rights to constantly use it. Sometimes our videos become demonetized, not from the donations, but maybe from an ad perspective. When you're playing copyright materials, we'll look it up and confirm. But yeah, that clip is obviously incredible, and it is very funny to sort of see him. Well, it's really funny. I think it's just like a visual thing, because like, I don't think the song itself is funny. I think it's just like the visual of a guy who looks like, a digitally aged Matthew Dellavedova come out and rap to that degree. It's it's I don't know. It's just an incredible visual, first and foremost. We also got $5 from Power Duster, who sends in money quite frequently, so I appreciate you, Power Duster. Celebrating Rogers /billionaire /corpse from saving money should never be normalized or applauded. Ownership gets a $12 million distribution from this move. Shake my head. So I know what he's talking about, and I agree with that too. Like, listen, there's no company in Canada that needs more money than Rogers. Okay, they've cleaned up on all fronts. Okay, they just spent what, $8 billion to acquire both the Raptors and the Leafs and the majority share, so they're not hurting. Okay, we all know that. I think anyone who's paid a phone bill in Canada understands to at least some sort of degree how much a duopoly over a country can lead to increased prices and a lack of competition, which should be one of the only benefits in capitalism, by the way. But regardless, we'll just put that aside. I think, look, from a management perspective, yes, I hear you from maybe morally or even ethically from that perspective. Like, I understand. Like, I don't think that there is anything to be celebrated about saving billionaires money. I do think, though, dealing with the reality of how to manage a team. Number one, getting more revenue to your organization so that you have more to spend on other things, I think is objectively a positive for just the management of the Raptors. And also going into the NBA, which if you're in the tax for multiple, like literally back-to-back years, you pay the repeater tax. There's other sort of penalties that come in that escalates the more you get into the first apron and the second apron. Like, I think it's like it limits your flexibility. And so unless you really need to dip into the tax, like there's not a great reason to. Now, granted, if it limits you from having as much talent on the team as possible, yeah, sure. The Raptors were not going to be interested in re-signing Ochai. So I would argue that it's not really much of a loss. Like they were going to lose him in the offseason anyway. And I also think that, like, again, like what matters to me is if there is talent to be out there and if there is winning to be out there, I want like management to be able to get to that level. And I think it's I look, Raptors have been around for what, 32 years now, 31 years. They paid the luxury tax once. That one time they paid a luxury tax, the Raptors were winning the championship, and they would have paid it for a second time and maybe even a third time if Kawhi was able to, was willing to re-sign and stay in Toronto. But no, they didn't. So, I think you kind of have to get to that level to sort of do it. But yeah, I think it's a valid point though. It's a valid point. Wolu, what's your review of the Cousins pod? I think this is with Vince Carter, who's above me right now, and Tracy McGrady. I haven't listened to it. To be honest, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not like I'm. It's not particularly interesting for me to hear from Vince. I actually really like T-Mac. Hearing sort of T-Mac on shows and stuff like that. But I find Vince to be very nervous sometimes, and it kind of throws me off vibe-wise. So I haven't actually checked out the pod yet. So maybe when I do check out the pod, I'll give you a bit more of a review on it as well. Oh, I think Power does to give a follow-up. Yeah, it's less about Ochai. I think it's just a conversation overall. McCain dumped to OKC so Josh Harris can conduct attacks. Yeah, I mean, that's a situation where I'm like, dude, you have team control over a guy. He's shown you promise. He's in his second year. I understand that you have VJ Edgecombe and you have, less of an incentive to play McCain, and McCain has not been as good this year. But we've seen a lot of players go through a sophomore slump, man. That kid can clearly play to some degree. If OKC wants him, I think that's already a pretty great sign that he's got some real potential. And I know they got some picks back for him, so they might argue, well, the picks are more valuable to us or whatever. But ultimately, yeah, like there are always moves at the deadline where teams are moving like crazy to sort of get under a specific magical line, so that instead of paying into a shared revenue pot, they're actually drawing from that shared revenue. That's just the way the world works, man. But yeah, that's to Power Duster's point. That's way more egregious of a move than as compared to, salary dumping Ochai, who the Raptors weren't going to really pay. So. By the way, speaking of ducking salaries, OKC is going to be the second most expensive team in the league next year. I looked it up just out of curiosity, but I think Cleveland is still scheduled to be the most expensive team next year. Now that they've shed Garland and they've added Harden, I think that technically reduces their bill, but I think they're going to keep Harden. So they're going to be up there, but it's either going to be Orlando or OKC as the most expensive team next year. I'd be very curious to see if OKC, especially as a title defender, reigning title champions, if they will actually keep their team together or if they will make financial moves to subtract from the roster, because that would feel more nasty than anything else, actually. So, last question before we go. Will, make the chill choice and take a rest now. You've earned it, man. Well, you know what? I'm not going to lie to you. Trade deadline coverage has been pretty exhaustive, and, we've certainly gone live quite a bit. I think it's been a good effort from, the whole crew at Hello, myself, Jerome, Karem, Alex. Like, it's been a lot, and I think that's fine. We understand that, like, there's moments in the season where it gets more stressful and you got to, like, put out more content and, go live at odd hours. Like, that's just part of it. You know what I mean? And, but at the end of the day, like, you got to make the chill choice. And with cores, you can always stay chill and you can always make the winning play. After a long day of reporting like this, been running around all day. We did a react pod from Hongqing, shouts to Hongqing. Like, you cover the game, you do the post-game press conference, you run home, you literally run to the Up Express station, which I'm not gonna lie to you, I haven't run in a while because I had a bit of a foot injury, so running was was surprisingly exhaustive. I felt mad washed, but in any case, you get home, it's past midnight, you're about to wrap up work, you probably want to whip out a Coors, and of course I got some in my fridge right now, so when I open it, I'm going to see the Rockies turn blue, and that means that the beer will be as cold as refreshing as the Rockies themselves. So when the game heats up, why not make the chill choice by grabbing a crisp, refreshing Coors Light? Find Coors Light near you. Visit CoorsLightShop.ca. Celebrate responsibly, and you must be of legal drinking age. All right, well, there's not too much else going on around the city at the moment. I think we can all kind of calm down a little bit. By the way, the Raptors' schedule calms down a lot as well. After playing, I think the Raptors have played the most games in the NBA at the moment in terms of just like, so the Raptors just played their 53rd game, which most teams in their same conference, like Detroit's played 50, the Knicks have played 51, the Celtics have played 51. There's even teams in the West. I think Houston for a while was playing way under. But, the Raptors are basically... I know 3 games are what's the big deal with 3 games? That's basically an extra week in the season as compared to most other teams. The Raptors have played a very heavy schedule so far. They're actually going to finally get a bit of a break, which I'm certainly not against. But Raptors got 2 more days off now. They don't play tomorrow. They don't play Saturday. They play an afternoon game against the Pacers, which will be Super Bowl Sunday. So they're literally just, getting a game out the way. And then, afterwards, they got another 2 days off. Then they play 1 more game against Detroit. And then right after that is All-Star break. So Raptors actually have, a huge break basically coming up. And even after the All-Star break, they only play, 1 game against Chicago on the 19th. And then they have, 2 more days off after that as well. So between now and the 22nd, so in the next, 2 weeks plus 2 days, the Raptors will only play 3 games. So, enjoy a bit of a break. Obviously, we'll come back to you with more content and more shows, and we'll look around the rest of the league. But I appreciate you guys for following all the trade deadline coverage and all the content. I think that for us, it's always fun, as basketball fans to sort of cover this. And ultimately, we're gonna take a bit of a break ourselves too, and get to All-Star weekend. Really looking forward to bringing you coverage from All-Star weekend as well. Very excited to go. Year 2 of Hello and Welcome. We're gonna have to make 2 trips to All-Star. It's going to be a really fun time. So before we get to there, though, we'll get a couple more shows in. But I appreciate you guys. No show, obviously, on Friday. No big move, so there's nothing else to really talk about. Otherwise, we'll see you on Sunday. I appreciate you guys. And,